Could $50 million really silence a son? Could money, power, and fear twist a family's bond into something unrecognizable? On a quiet Sunday morning in Brentwood, luxury and wealth hid something far darker beneath the manicured lawns and security gates. Rob Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, had lived a life that, on the surface, seemed perfect. Opulent estate, a successful family, children who should have loved and supported them. But by the time the sun rose that morning, everything had shattered. Their lives and the lives of those around them would never be the same again. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story starts in a way that might sound familiar in tabloids. A family with money, a son with ambition and resentment, and a mother whose secrets were bigger than her conscience. Tracy Reiner, poised, commanding, and seemingly untouchable, allegedly orchestrated a $50 million pact that could silence her own son. The terms were simple, chilling, and perhaps unprecedented. Stay quiet about certain truths regarding the family inheritance. And if things went wrong, take the fall. A fall guy, as insiders would later call it. But why would a mother need to pay her own child so much to remain silent? What could be so damning that $50 million wouldn't even guarantee peace of mind? The morning of the tragedy, Romy Reiner, 27, discovered the bodies. She walked into the scene of unimaginable horror. Her parents stabbed to death, their lifeless forms lying inside the $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Nick Reiner, 32, the son living in the guest house, was arrested that night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But what exactly led to this? Was it cold-blooded ambition, a dangerous pact gone wrong, or something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of the family mansion? And who really benefited from the Reiners' deaths? These questions form the backbone of a story that is shocking, heartbreaking, and full of twists you would never expect. From the start, tensions had been high in the Reiner family. The inheritance was a powder keg waiting to explode. Rob had confronted Tracy, suspicious and angry, about alleged lies surrounding who would inherit what. According to reports, the argument was heated, filled with accusations and denials, and it may have been the trigger that set off a chain reaction of events nobody could have anticipated. Tracy, facing scrutiny and perhaps fearing the loss of control over the family's fortune, allegedly made the decision to secure her own protection with the $50 million pact to Nick. The implication was clear. Money could buy loyalty, or at least silence. But money cannot buy conscience, and it certainly cannot rewrite the laws of murder. Jake Reiner, the family member who has now come forward with explosive information, claims to know the truth behind this pact. His revelations suggest that the $50 million transfer was not just about silencing Nick. It was part of a deeper plan, something that may have ensured someone would take the fall if the worst happened. Jake alleges that the agreement effectively handed Nick responsibility for events that he may not have directly caused, but was strategically positioned to absorb the consequences. But why would Tracy risk such exposure? What was she protecting, and what did she think she could get away with? Consider the human element for a moment. Imagine walking into a lavish estate, a home that should have been a sanctuary, only to find a scene of absolute terror. Romy reportedly discovered her parents in their final moments, and in that instant, the idyllic family portrait shattered into a nightmare. Her own words to police, according to sources, warned of a dangerous family member, though she stopped short of directly accusing anyone. Her insight alone raises questions. Did she see warning signs? Had she sensed danger within the family for years, masked by wealth and appearances? And what did it feel like to confront such a chilling reality at the very place that should have symbolized safety and love? The story has all the elements of a thriller. There is wealth, there is power, and there is a tangled web of secrets. But unlike fiction, the stakes here are painfully real. Nick's alleged involvement, the $50 million pact, Tracy's motives, Romy's warnings, and Rob's confrontations form a complex puzzle that law enforcement, the media, and now the public are scrambling to piece together. Every detail, from the timing of the wire transfers to the family dynamics behind closed doors, could hold the key to understanding what really happened. And then there's the question of motive. Was Nick acting out of desperation, fear, or ambition? Or was he simply trapped in a situation engineered by others, A pawn in a game where the rules were written in money and betrayal? The introduction of the $50 million pact adds an entirely new dimension. This was no ordinary family conflict. This was a calculated, high-stakes game, with millions of dollars, reputations, and even lives hanging in the balance. Let's not forget the eerie irony of the situation. Rob Reiner, a man who confronted his wife over honesty and integrity, may have unknowingly provoked the events that led to his own death. Michelle, supportive yet caught in the crossfire, became an unintentional casualty of a secret war waged behind closed doors. And Nick, the son who supposedly agreed to a massive financial incentive to stay silent, now faces the ultimate cost, a murder charge that could define the rest of his life. As viewers, we are left to question the nature of loyalty, greed, and family obligation. Would you take $50 million to stay silent, knowing it could implicate you in the death of your parents? Could wealth blind someone to morality? And how far can a family go to protect itself, even when protection comes at a devastating cost? These are not just rhetorical questions. They are the very fabric of the Reiner tragedy. But there's more. Jake Reiner's revelations hint at layers of deception that go beyond the obvious. He suggests that the $50 million pact was only the tip of the iceberg. According to his insider perspective, there were additional maneuvers, hidden clauses, and perhaps even unnamed accomplices who had interests aligned in keeping certain truths buried. Could it be that the murder investigation is just scratching the surface? And if so, what could the full picture reveal about the Reiners' family secrets? The timing of the tragedy also raises suspicion. Rob and Michelle were found murdered on a Sunday morning, a time when routine and leisure normally dominated the estate. Was the timing intentional? Was it meant to catch someone off guard, or to align with a calculated plan that the perpetrators had rehearsed in their minds long before the fateful day? These details, while seemingly small, add to the psychological tension surrounding the case. And the public response cannot be understated. Social media exploded with theories, speculations, and outrage. Headlines screamed betrayal, money, and murder. Yet amidst the chaos, certain facts remained locked away, accessible only to insiders and investigators. Jake Reiner's decision to speak out shatters that veil of secrecy, revealing the skeletons in the Reiners' closets. But even his account leaves questions unanswered. What did he see firsthand? What documents or communications does he have that prove the pact existed? And most importantly, what consequences might he face for exposing them? At its core, this story is about human nature under pressure. Wealth, family, secrecy, and fear collide in a way that challenges our understanding of morality and loyalty. Every decision, every secret, every lie in the Reiner family appears to have had ripple effects, ultimately culminating in tragedy. And yet, the most shocking elements may still be ahead. The $50 million pact, while staggering on its own, might only be one chapter in a story filled with betrayals, hidden alliances, and unforeseen twists. So as we begin this journey into the Reiner family saga, ask yourself, what would you do if faced with such temptation, fear, and moral conflict? Could you remain silent when the stakes were life and death? Would you risk everything to protect your own interests, or the interests of someone else? And most importantly, who in this story can be trusted, if anyone at all? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A revelation from Jake Reiner threatens to upend everything we thought we knew about the $50 million pact, the murders, and the dynamics of this family. As the investigation continues and secrets unravel, viewers will be taken step by step through a labyrinth of greed, betrayal, and shocking truths that stretch far beyond the walls of the Brentwood estate. Could a single Sunday morning shatter an entire family? For the Reiners, that morning in Brentwood became the line between life as they knew it and a nightmare they could never escape. The sun had barely risen, and the quiet streets surrounding the $13.5 million estate seemed untouched by the darkness about to unfold. But inside, everything was about to implode. Romy Reiner, 27, had woken early, like she always did, to the faint sunlight filtering through the towering oaks on the estate grounds. Her mind was unsettled, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Maybe it was the lingering tension between her parents and Nick over finances. Maybe it was a feeling she'd learned to trust after years of witnessing small cracks widen into family conflicts. Or maybe it was just intuition. Whatever it was, it propelled her toward the house, toward a scene she would never forget. The front doors, usually polished and welcoming, appeared slightly ajar. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but for Romy, it set off alarm bells. She called out to her parents, a casual, "Good morning," that felt too small against the vast silence of the estate. No response. She tried again, louder, more insistent. Still nothing. A knot tightened in her stomach. Something was wrong. Something terrifyingly wrong. Walking through the familiar hallways, she noticed signs that immediately made her pulse quicken. A chair was overturned near the dining table. A glass had broken, though no one had been walking there earlier. The faint scent of something metallic lingered in the air, a smell that sent chills down her spine. She called her mother's name, then her father's, but only the hollow echo of her own voice returned. And then she saw them. Rob Reiner, 78, the patriarch of the family, lying on the ground. His once sharp eyes were closed. His body slumped unnaturally. Michelle, 70, equally lifeless, was nearby, and the scene was horrifying in its brutality. Romy's world tilted, and for a moment, she felt as if gravity itself had abandoned her. Panic surged through her. Tears streamed. Her voice trembled as she yelled for help, her calls carrying through the estate and out into the surrounding neighborhood. By the time police arrived, the estate was swarming with officers, paramedics, and crime scene investigators. Each step into the house revealed more questions than answers. Why had this happened? Who had the opportunity? And most importantly, could anyone have predicted it? The initial shock on the faces of the first responders was telling. Even they had never seen anything quite like this. Nick Reiner, 32, lived in the guest house on the property. According to sources, he had been there that night, the very night the tragedy unfolded. Police quickly learned that he was the last known person on the property in proximity to the main house, placing him at the center of every suspicion. But was he truly responsible, or was he being framed by circumstances, or by an agreement that had bound him in ways outsiders could not understand? The investigation revealed that Nick had allegedly received a $50 million payment from Tracy Reiner. The purpose? To remain silent about certain family secrets and financial misdeeds. The implications were staggering. Could someone be pushed so far by money, fear, and obligation that murder seemed like a plausible outcome? And if Nick had agreed to take the fall, what exactly had he signed up for? Romy's statements to police were equally shocking. She reportedly spoke of a dangerous family member, someone who had caused concern for years. Her testimony suggested that the Reiners' family tensions were far deeper than anyone had suspected. The unease that had been simmering behind closed doors had escalated into violence, and now the very people who were supposed to protect each other had become victims of a deadly betrayal. Neighbors reported unusual activity the night before the discovery. Lights flickering in unexpected rooms, cars coming and going at odd hours, and whispers of arguments that carried through the walls. All of it painted a picture of a family on the edge, a family where wealth and secrecy intersected with fear and resentment. But who orchestrated the final act? Was it an accident of circumstance, or a carefully plotted plan that went horrifyingly right or wrong? Jake Reiner's emerging account adds another layer of intrigue. He claims that the $50 million pact was more than just a financial arrangement. According to Jake, it contained a contingency. If things escalated, Nick was to take responsibility, regardless of actual guilt. In essence, the agreement allegedly turned him into a buffer, a human shield between Tracy and the consequences of her own actions. The morality of such a pact is nearly impossible to fathom, yet it appears central to understanding the tragic events of that Sunday morning. The timeline of events is equally chilling. Reports indicate that the bodies were discovered early, but the actual window of the attacks remains uncertain. Witnesses near the estate mentioned hearing sounds consistent with struggle or confrontation, but no definitive confirmation has emerged. Was it premeditated? Was it a spontaneous escalation of familial arguments? Or was it a tragic accident, born from a plan that spiraled entirely out of control? One of the most unsettling aspects is the contrast between appearances and reality. On the surface, the Reiners were a successful, high-profile family with a sprawling estate, a carefully curated public image, and a lifestyle envied by many. But beneath that facade, the narrative is one of betrayal, fear, and escalating tension. How often do we mistake wealth for security or appearances for integrity? And how far can secrets stretch before they snap back in the most devastating way? Nick's arrest that night brought its own wave of shock. Law enforcement officials confirmed that he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Yet even in the face of overwhelming suspicion, questions linger. Was he the mastermind, a pawn, or something in between? Could the $50 million pact have pressured him into a role he could never fully escape? And if so, does justice lie in punishment, or in uncovering the full, tangled truth of family deception? Meanwhile, Romy's role cannot be overstated. She is both witness and participant, the daughter whose actions directly influenced the investigation's early direction. Her courage in confronting a horrific scene, in speaking out about the family member she feared, demonstrates the complexity of the situation. Loyalty to family is now entangled with the need for accountability. The Reiner story becomes not just about crime, but about the impossible ethical and emotional dilemmas that arise when wealth, secrecy, and human frailty collide. Public fascination with the case has been intense. Social media and mainstream outlets alike exploded with speculation, rumors, and conflicting narratives. The headline-grabbing details, the murders, the $50 million transfer, Nick's arrest, Romy's warnings, captured attention worldwide. Yet the full story remains hidden, accessible only to those with insider knowledge, such as Jake Reiner. And his willingness to speak out threatens to dismantle the remaining barriers between private family secrets and public scrutiny. As investigators continue to piece together the timeline, the financial transactions, and the family dynamics, the overarching question remains: who truly pulled the trigger on that fateful Sunday? Was it a son trapped by a pact? A mother manipulating circumstances with money? Or a tragic convergence of secrets, lies, and impulsive decisions that left everyone involved reeling? The house, once a symbol of wealth and safety, is now a crime scene, a repository of unanswered questions, and a chilling reminder that no family is immune to the destructive power of secrets. And for viewers, the story poses difficult moral questions. What would you do in Nick's position? Could you walk away from a pact that binds you to consequences beyond your control? And what would it take for a family to reach a breaking point so extreme that murder became the final outcome? But just as Romy uncovered the first horrifying details, Jake Reiner's revelations were beginning to surface. He hinted at hidden motives, unspoken agreements, and shocking truths that would upend the narrative everyone thought they understood. And as the investigation deepened, the surface scratches of scandal revealed an abyss of deception, greed, and betrayal that no one could have imagined. What came next would push this story beyond the bounds of conventional tragedy. The Reiner family's world had collapsed, but the fallout was only beginning. The $50 million silence pact, the confrontation between parents and children, and the chilling murders set the stage for revelations that could rewrite everything the public thought they knew about the family. And the question that lingers: could justice ever truly be served in a family where money, loyalty, and secrets intersected in deadly ways? Who exactly was Nick Reiner? Was he a devoted son, a troubled young man, or a pawn in a deadly game orchestrated by those around him? To understand the events that shook the Reiner family to its core, we have to step inside Nick's world. The world of the son who lived just steps away from the house where his parents were brutally murdered. Nick, 32, had always been something of an enigma. Friends described him as charismatic, intelligent, and capable of charm that could disarm even the most skeptical. But beneath the surface, there were patterns of restlessness, impulsive behavior, and an uneasy relationship with authority figures, particularly his mother, Tracy. The guest house he called home wasn't just a physical space. It was a metaphorical distance, a buffer between himself and the family he both loved and feared. Living so close to his parents, yet separate from their daily life, created a strange dynamic. On the one hand, Nick was insulated, able to observe without fully participating. On the other, this separation intensified suspicion. He was present, aware, yet just distant enough to act without immediate oversight. Investigators would later describe his proximity as critical. It placed him squarely at the center of every question about opportunity and motive. Nick's relationship with Tracy was particularly complex. Reports suggest a tension rooted in both love and resentment. On one hand, she was his mother, the woman who raised him and shaped his early years. On the other, she was a figure of authority and wealth, wielding power that sometimes seemed suffocating. According to insiders, the alleged $50 million silence pact exemplifies the extremes of their relationship, a massive financial incentive meant to bind him, to control him, or to protect someone else from the consequences of hidden truths. But Nick wasn't just defined by his family dynamics. His personal history reveals a pattern of decisions that, while not necessarily criminal, hint at impulsivity and risk-taking. He had business ventures, social connections, and friends who described him as ambitious but sometimes reckless. Those qualities, combined with the stress of family tension and the alleged pact, set the stage for a situation that could escalate quickly and tragically. The day of the murders, investigators would later find that Nick's movements were unusually difficult to trace. The timeline suggested he was near the main house at key moments, but eyewitness accounts were contradictory, and surveillance footage was incomplete. That ambiguity became one of the critical pieces of the puzzle. Could someone be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or was this carefully orchestrated? Every detail mattered, and Nick's proximity made him the prime suspect. But not necessarily the orchestrator. In exploring Nick's mindset, we encounter conflicting elements. On one hand, he reportedly expressed loyalty to his parents and sister, Romy, and had moments of genuine care and connection. On the other, he had reportedly clashed with Tracy over finances, inheritance issues, and the family's internal secrets. Could a young man, faced with the temptation of $50 million, pressure, and a convoluted family arrangement, make choices that spiraled beyond control? And if so, were those choices conscious or influenced by forces beyond his understanding? Consider the allegations that Nick agreed to take the fall if anything went wrong. That concept alone is staggering. It suggests a premeditated plan designed to protect others while putting him directly in the crosshairs. Could someone agree to such terms without fully grasping the consequences? Or was Nick complicit in ways that would only become clear once every secret was revealed? Investigators and insiders alike would argue both sides, creating a swirl of ambiguity that kept the public and the family on edge. Friends and acquaintances of Nick provide further insight into the man behind the headlines. Some describe him as calm, strategic, even funny, a person capable of great warmth. Others describe sudden outbursts, an inability to handle confrontation, and a streak of stubbornness that often led to heated disputes. These contradictory traits paint a complex portrait. A son caught between loyalty and ambition, morality and survival, love and fear. The guest house itself, seemingly innocuous, became a central point in the investigation. Nick's living space allowed him privacy and autonomy, but it also placed him near the center of the unfolding tragedy. Investigators noted that the layout of the estate, combined with his proximity, made it theoretically possible for him to move quickly between locations, observe family interactions, and intervene. Or, critics would argue, execute a plan. Every square foot of the property suddenly mattered, turning architecture into a clue and proximity into suspicion. But it wasn't just about location. The emotional context is equally critical. Nick, living apart yet tethered to the family by wealth, obligation, and complex emotional bonds, was constantly negotiating a web of expectations. The alleged $50 million pact added a layer of coercion or temptation that complicated his decisions. Did he feel trapped? Did he feel empowered? Or was he simply trying to survive in a situation designed to ensnare him? As the investigation unfolded, authorities also examined communications between Nick and other family members. Alleged texts, emails, and phone records hinted at frustration, tension, and at times, secrecy. While none of these communications proved guilt, they suggested that the family's internal conflicts were ongoing, intense, and possibly escalating toward the tragic events that would follow. Public perception of Nick also became a powerful force. Media outlets painted him alternately as a villain, a victim, and a pawn in a larger game. Social media buzzed with speculation, memes, and accusations. Some argued that wealth had warped him, that privilege had insulated him from moral consequences. Others sympathized, suggesting he had been manipulated and trapped by forces beyond his control. The truth, as usual, was likely far more complicated. Romy's testimony and actions further complicated the narrative. As the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies, she became a key witness, offering insight into family dynamics and warning authorities of potential danger. Her perspective suggested that Nick was not the only person with motives, pressures, or secrets, creating layers of ambiguity. Could someone else have been involved? And if so, how did Nick fit into the chain of events? Jake Reiner's revelations cast a long shadow over Nick's role. According to Jake, the $50 million pact was not just a financial transaction. It was a strategy designed to shift blame, to create plausible deniability, and to protect others while making Nick the fall guy. The moral implications are staggering. If true, the pact illustrates a family dynamic where money supersedes morality, where loyalty is transactional, and where a son could be positioned as both protector and scapegoat. And yet, despite the accusations, contradictions, and public scrutiny, Nick's personal humanity remains visible. He is not just a suspect in a headline. He is a young man navigating pressures few can comprehend. The tension between legal culpability, moral responsibility, and emotional loyalty drives the narrative forward, compelling audiences to wrestle with difficult questions. How much agency did he truly have? Was he capable of violence? Or was he ensnared by circumstances designed to make him appear guilty? The complexity of Nick's role is further amplified by the inheritance disputes at the heart of the alleged $50 million pact. The Reiners were a wealthy family, and money had always been a point of contention. Rob's confrontations with Tracy over inheritance lies created the conditions that made the pact plausible, or even necessary, in the eyes of insiders. But the morality of using money to buy silence, or to protect someone else, raises profound questions about loyalty, ethics, and the destructive power of wealth. Neighbors and witnesses added more layers to the story. Reports of unusual activity the night before the murders, coupled with inconsistent accounts of Nick's whereabouts, fueled suspicion. Each small detail, the timing of lights, the presence of cars, or the sounds from the estate, became magnified, feeding a narrative of tension, fear, and potential premeditation. The estate itself, once a symbol of safety, was now a stage for a psychological thriller. The day of the murders and the subsequent investigation revealed the fragility of family bonds. Wealth and proximity were not enough to protect the Reiners from internal conflict, betrayal, or tragedy. Nick's position as a son, a resident of the guest house, and a recipient of the $50 million pact made him central to every question, every theory, and every accusation. And as law enforcement dug deeper, the intersection of money, secrecy, and family loyalty became increasingly complex, revealing layers of human behavior that were as fascinating as they were disturbing. But just when it seemed that Nick's role was defined, Jake Reiner's statement suggested that even this portrait was incomplete. According to Jake, there were hidden maneuvers, unspoken pressures, and possibly other actors who had influenced Nick's actions in ways the public could not yet see. This revelation throws open new questions. Was Nick acting alone? Or was he merely one piece of a puzzle crafted by others, with consequences none of them fully anticipated? And so, as we leave the guest house and step into the next layer of the story, one thing becomes clear. Understanding Nick Reiner is key to understanding the entire tragedy. His proximity, relationships, and the alleged financial pact place him at the center of a storm that blends greed, loyalty, fear, and morality. And as the investigation continues, every detail about Nick, the choices he made, the pressures he faced, and the secrets he kept, will help us inch closer to the truth. But what comes next is even more shocking. The alleged $50 million pact between Tracy and Nick, the financial arrangement meant to ensure silence, holds secrets that go far beyond money. It may contain the blueprint for betrayal, and the evidence is starting to emerge in ways that will shock the public and possibly rewrite the narrative of the Reiner family forever. Could money really buy loyalty, silence, and protection? For Tracy Reiner, according to Jake Reiner's revelations, the answer was yes, or at least she hoped it would be. The alleged $50 million transfer to her son, Nick, wasn't just a transaction. It was a lifeline, a shield, and, perhaps, the most dangerous family secret ever kept behind the gates of the Brentwood estate. But why would a mother pay her own child so much money to stay quiet? And what exactly did she think she could achieve with such a staggering sum? The origins of the pact trace back to a confrontation between Rob Reiner and Tracy over inheritance discrepancies. Rob, concerned and possibly suspicious, had questioned Tracy about financial misrepresentations, uncovering tensions that had been simmering for years. This confrontation, sources claim, escalated quickly, voices raised, accusations thrown, and a sense of betrayal filling the room. For Tracy, it wasn't just about defending herself. It was about maintaining control over her family, her fortune, and the secrets that could unravel both. Enter Nick Reiner, 32 years old, living in the guest house, and already navigating the pressures of family expectations. He became the focus of a strategy that blended fear, obligation, and temptation. The alleged $50 million pact essentially promised him immense wealth in exchange for silence. But it came with conditions far more dangerous than a simple NDA. Reports suggest that if anything went wrong, if family conflicts escalated or secrets were exposed, Nick had agreed to take responsibility, acting as a fall guy for actions that may not have been entirely his own doing. Imagine the weight of such an arrangement. 32, facing a moral and legal minefield, and suddenly tasked with absorbing blame for an entire family's darkest secrets. How does someone reconcile the promise of financial security with the risk of criminal liability? Could Nick truly have understood what he was agreeing to? Or was he coerced by circumstance, emotion, and the sheer power of money? The structure of the pact, according to insiders, was meticulous. Legal language, bank transfers, and conditional clauses created a framework that seemed almost engineered to protect Tracy while placing Nick in an impossible position. In effect, he was being asked to act as a buffer, a shield against the consequences of her actions, all while benefiting handsomely if he complied. But benefits have a way of coming with strings attached, and in this case, the strings were deadly. Jake Reiner's disclosures add another chilling layer. He claims that the pact wasn't just about silence. It was about control, manipulation, and contingency. In the event of an escalation, Nick would take the fall. But that fall, according to Jake, wasn't just legal or financial. It was moral and emotional. The alleged agreement forced Nick into a position where, if tragedy struck, he would bear the brunt, protecting others while paying the ultimate price himself. What could possibly justify such an arrangement? Wealth, family loyalty, fear of scandal. Any or all of these may have played a role. But the ethical implications are staggering. Here was a mother, sending millions to her son, essentially asking him to carry the weight of actions he might not have even committed. Could any family survive such a transaction without it destroying their bonds? And yet, according to Jake, Tracy believed this was the only way to ensure secrecy and control. The timing of the $50 million transfer also raises questions. Reports suggest it occurred shortly after Rob's confrontation, signaling a reactionary measure to contain the fallout. The sum itself, $50 million, is staggering, more than enough to change a person's life. But could even that much money outweigh the fear, pressure, and moral responsibility of taking the blame for an entire family's darkest secrets? For Nick, it may have been a Faustian bargain, one with consequences he could never fully predict. Inside the Reiner family, the effects of the pact were subtle at first, but became increasingly significant over time. The tension between Nick and Tracy escalated, while the rest of the family remained largely unaware of the financial arrangement. This secrecy created an environment where mistrust, suspicion, and fear flourished. Every conversation, every interaction, every glance held hidden meaning. And for Nick, the knowledge that he had agreed to a deal with potentially catastrophic consequences must have weighed heavily, creating a psychological tension that only intensified in the days leading up to the murders. But money, as often happens, can distort perception. What began as a tool for control may have become a source of pressure, paranoia, and conflict. Was Nick increasingly aware of the risks he had taken on? Did he feel trapped, manipulated, or coerced by the very person who had promised him a fortune? And did Tracy underestimate the moral and emotional toll of placing her son in such a precarious position? The legal implications of the pact are equally fascinating. If it exists as described, it could be considered evidence of premeditation, coercion, or even conspiracy. Law enforcement would undoubtedly examine every detail: bank records, legal documents, communications. Each piece could illuminate not only the pact itself, but also the chain of events that led to the tragedy. And yet, as of now, many of these details remain hidden, known only to insiders like Jake Reiner, leaving the public and investigators in a state of suspense and speculation. Romy's involvement adds yet another layer of complexity. As the daughter who discovered the bodies, she is both witness and participant, caught in the web of family secrets and deadly arrangements. Her insight into family dynamics and her warnings to police about a dangerous family member suggest that she may have understood, at least in part, the tensions that the pact created. But even her perspective is limited. Secrets, after all, can obscure even those closest to the truth. As we examine Tracy's motivations, one thing becomes clear: this was not a casual decision. It was calculated, deliberate, and high stakes. The sum, the conditions, and the timing all point to a strategy designed to protect her while controlling the narrative. But controlling narratives rarely results in control over events, and in this case, the pact may have set in motion the very outcomes it was meant to prevent. The ethical dilemmas posed by the $50 million pact are profound. Could anyone justify sending their own child into a potentially lethal situation for the sake of secrecy? Could a parent truly believe that money could replace moral responsibility? And if the pact was known to others in the family, what does that reveal about the broader dynamics at play? As investigators continue to dig into bank records, communications, and personal accounts, the layers of the story deepen. The pact, initially designed to conceal, may now be the key to understanding the cascade of events leading to the murders. And as details emerge, the public is left to grapple with the stark reality. Wealth, secrecy, and family loyalty can combine in ways that are both fascinating and horrifying. Yet even with all this, questions remain unanswered. Did Nick truly agree to these terms, fully aware of the potential consequences? Was the pact enforceable, legally or morally? And could it have influenced actions that ultimately led to the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner? Each answer seems to create more questions, a spiral of curiosity and dread that deepens with every revelation. And while the pact itself is shocking, Jake Reiner's disclosures suggest there is more to the story: hidden clauses, unspoken agreements, and consequences nobody anticipated. Could there have been other actors involved? Could this financial arrangement have triggered a chain reaction that escalated beyond anyone's control? The $50 million pact, meant to silence, control, and protect, may have instead illuminated the cracks in the Reiner family's foundation. It shows how money can distort relationships, how loyalty can be bought, and how secrets can spiral into tragedy. And for viewers, it forces a difficult question: how much is too much when it comes to family, money, and morality? But what happened next would redefine everything. The alleged pact, initially just a financial safeguard, may have been the spark that ignited a catastrophe, linking greed, fear, and betrayal in ways nobody expected. And as we move to the next chapter, the story deepens, delving into Rob Reiner's confrontation with Tracy, the heated argument that may have been the tipping point for the tragedy that followed. What drives a confrontation that can change the course of a family forever? In the case of the Reiners, it was a combination of suspicion, betrayal, and long-simmering tension that erupted in a single, fateful moment. Rob Reiner, 78, a man whose life had been defined by discipline, intelligence, and a deep sense of responsibility, had reached the limit of his patience. Confronting Tracy about the alleged inheritance lies was not just a discussion, it was a reckoning. The argument reportedly began in what seemed like a routine conversation. Rob had been reviewing family finances and noticed discrepancies that didn't add up. Questions arose about how inheritance plans had been structured, what Tracy had disclosed, and whether Nick had been intentionally left in the dark, or worse, manipulated. Rob, known for his analytical mind and attention to detail, wasn't willing to overlook these irregularities. What started as a simple question quickly escalated into something more. Tracy, according to insiders, was poised but defensive. Her public demeanor suggested confidence and control, yet in private, she had reason to fear exposure. The $50 million silence pact with Nick wasn't just a safety net. It was a calculated shield against exactly this type of confrontation. When Rob pressed, asking for transparency and accountability, Tracy's responses were reportedly measured, but the tension was palpable. Each word, each glance, each inflection of tone carried layers of meaning that only those within the family could interpret fully. Nick's position in all of this was uniquely precarious. As the recipient of the massive financial transfer meant to secure his silence, he found himself caught between loyalty to his mother and the expectations of his father. Could he intervene? Should he stay silent? And in the eyes of those observing, could he be complicit if the confrontation escalated beyond control? The psychological weight of such decisions cannot be overstated. For Nick, this was no ordinary family quarrel. It was a moral and emotional minefield. Sources suggest that the confrontation involved raised voices, accusations, and threats. Rob, seeking the truth, may have challenged Tracy in ways that touched nerves long buried under wealth and outward appearances. Tracy, determined to protect herself and her secrets, reportedly responded with a combination of deflection and assertion of control. The clash between Rob's pursuit of honesty and Tracy's need for secrecy created a pressure cooker environment. Every second heightened the risk that what should have been a contained conversation could spiral into something uncontrollable. This confrontation was not just verbal, it carried emotional weight. Rob, as the patriarch, likely approached it with a sense of duty and frustration. Tracy, facing scrutiny and possible exposure, responded with a strategic mindset, viewing the situation as a threat to her authority and position. And Nick, observing from the guest house or nearby, may have been acutely aware of the stakes. Could he intervene without incriminating himself? Did he realize that the financial pact made him an unwitting participant in the unfolding drama? Witnesses later described subtle cues that indicated the argument was intensifying. Slamming doors, abrupt movements, and the shift in tone suggested that tempers had flared. The atmosphere, already thick with tension from years of family friction and financial disputes, had reached a breaking point. Observers would later note that what occurred next may have been inevitable given the convergence of personalities, pressures, and secrets. Jake Reiner's account adds a chilling perspective to the confrontation. He claims that Tracy's motives were not purely defensive. She was actively strategizing, ensuring that Nick would absorb the consequences if the situation escalated. This premeditation adds a layer of moral complexity that is difficult to reconcile. Was Tracy trying to protect her family? Or was she manipulating events to shield herself at any cost, even if it meant endangering her husband and son? The argument reportedly touched on sensitive subjects. The allocation of inheritance, the validity of past financial decisions, and Nick's position in the family hierarchy. Each topic was fraught with emotional and practical implications. Rob's insistence on transparency collided with Tracy's desire for control, creating a scenario ripe for escalation. In moments like these, minor disagreements can become catalysts for catastrophic outcomes, especially when high stakes, wealth, and secrecy are involved. As the confrontation intensified, the psychological tension became almost tangible. Rob's frustration, Tracy's defensive posture, and Nick's internal conflict converged in a space that was both physically and emotionally charged. Could anyone have predicted that this clash of wills would precede a tragedy of such magnitude? Did the parties involved understand the potential consequences of their words and actions? Or were they blinded by pride, fear, and the history of family conflict? Evidence suggests that the confrontation may have been the spark that set off a chain reaction. Moments after the heated discussion, tensions reportedly spilled over into actions that would have devastating consequences. Investigators believe that this was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of mistrust, secrecy, and financial manipulation. The alleged $50 million pact loomed over the argument, creating a pressure that may have contributed to decisions leading directly to the murders. Romy's perspective adds an additional layer of insight. As the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies, she had observed patterns of conflict within the family that others might have dismissed. Her prior warnings about a dangerous family member indicate an awareness of the underlying tensions. In the context of the confrontation, her observations suggest that the argument between Rob and Tracy may have been more than just a dispute. It was the moment when long-standing issues reached a tipping point. The fallout from the confrontation is central to understanding the tragic events that followed. Rob and Michelle's deaths cannot be divorced from the emotional, psychological, and financial pressures that existed in the family. The clash over inheritance, secrecy, and the alleged pact created conditions that made tragedy almost inevitable. Yet the precise sequence of events remains clouded by conflicting testimonies, incomplete evidence, and the strategic silence of those involved. Jake Reiner's revelations further complicate the narrative. According to Jake, the confrontation may have been orchestrated, at least in part, to trigger outcomes favorable to Tracy, ensuring that Nick's role as the fall guy would come into effect. The idea that a financial pact could dictate the psychological environment of a family argument is chilling, highlighting the lengths to which wealth and secrecy can influence behavior. As investigators piece together the moments leading up to the murders, questions emerge that challenge conventional understanding of family dynamics. How much of the confrontation was spontaneous, and how much was influenced by prior planning? Was Nick aware of his potential role as a fall guy? Did Tracy anticipate escalation, or was she relying on the pact to maintain control without predicting tragedy? Each possibility paints a different picture, none of which offers comfort or clarity. The confrontation also raises profound moral questions. Can financial incentives justify coercion or manipulation within a family? At what point does a parent's attempt to protect their secrets cross into danger for others? And if Nick was positioned to absorb blame, what responsibility does he bear, both morally and legally? These questions lie at the heart of the Reiner tragedy, challenging assumptions about family, loyalty, and accountability. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the Reiners' world shifted irreversibly. What began as a verbal dispute over inheritance spiraled into a series of events that culminated in the deaths of Rob and Michelle. The alleged $50 million pact, the psychological pressures, and the complex web of family relationships all intersected to create a situation that no one could have fully anticipated. But what happened next would push the story beyond comprehension. The confrontation, while pivotal, was only the beginning. It set in motion a sequence of events that would unravel secrets, expose hidden alliances, and bring to light shocking truths about the Reiner family. And as the investigation unfolded, each revelation would challenge assumptions, test loyalties, and keep the world watching in disbelief. The question now is, how did the confrontation translate into the tragedy that shook Brentwood? What choices were made in the hours after, and who made them? The answers lie in the shadows of the estate, in the motives, fears, and secrets of the people closest to the events. And as we move forward, the story will delve deeper into these dynamics, revealing truths that are as chilling as they are unexpected. What does it feel like to stumble upon a scene so horrific that it redefines everything you thought you knew about your family? For Romy Reiner, 27, that day began as any other Sunday, but it quickly spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt her forever. She became both witness and participant in one of the most chilling events in modern family tragedy, a tragedy that exposed secrets, lies, and betrayals hidden behind the gilded walls of the Brentwood estate. Romy was the first to discover the bodies of her parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner. Imagine that moment. Walking through a home that once represented safety, comfort, and love, only to find lifeless forms where warmth and laughter had once existed. The shock was immediate. Her instincts screamed, her mind raced, and her body froze. The house, which had always been a symbol of family unity, had transformed into a crime scene of unimaginable horror. Her initial reaction was a mix of disbelief and terror. How could this have happened? How could anyone harm the people who had given her life, who had nurtured and guided her? And in that instant, a terrible question crystallized in her mind. Could someone from within the family be responsible? Romy reportedly informed police that there was a dangerous family member, someone whose behavior had caused concern in the past. She did not explicitly accuse anyone, but her warning carried a weight that could not be ignored. Romy's testimony quickly became central to the investigation. Law enforcement officers and detectives focused intently on her account, knowing that as the first person on the scene, she had unique insight into both the circumstances of the discovery and the internal dynamics of the family. She recounted not only what she saw, but also subtle signs of tension that had been present for months, if not years. Whispered arguments, sudden trips, and interactions that had always seemed normal to outsiders but hinted at deeper conflicts. Her words to the police included detailed observations about the condition of the estate, the positions of the bodies, and the immediate surroundings. She described her father, Rob, and her mother, Michelle, in ways that highlighted both the brutality of their deaths and the intimacy of the loss. The emotions she conveyed were raw, palpable, and unfiltered. Grief, confusion, and a desperate need for answers that only the truth could provide. But Romy's testimony went beyond the scene itself. She also offered insights into family relationships, particularly the tensions surrounding Nick Reiner. According to her, there had been unease and friction, patterns of behavior that could indicate risk if left unchecked. While she did not directly accuse Nick, her remarks raised questions about his role, his proximity, and the pressure he may have been under. Especially in light of the alleged $50 million silence pact orchestrated by Tracy. Her account also touched on the psychological environment of the household. The Reiner estate, with its sprawling rooms, private guest house, and high walls, may have seemed idyllic, but Romy's testimony revealed a different reality, one of hidden conflicts, suppressed emotions, and unspoken threats. This duality, the contrast between appearance and reality, was central to understanding how such a tragedy could occur. Families, even those seemingly perfect on the outside, often carry secrets and tensions that remain invisible until they explode. Romy's testimony highlighted her own inner conflict as well. She was torn between loyalty to her family and her sense of justice. On one hand, she loved her parents and wanted to honor their memory. On the other, she recognized that the truth, no matter how painful, needed to emerge. Her position placed her in a precarious situation. She had to navigate personal grief while providing information that could implicate someone she also cared about deeply. The emotional stakes of her account cannot be overstated. She conveyed a sense of fear, not only for herself, but for the broader implications of family secrets being revealed. The alleged financial arrangements, the inheritance disputes, and the complex dynamics of loyalty and betrayal created a pressure cooker environment. Romy's testimony served as both a beacon and a warning. She was shedding light on the tensions that had been festering, while also cautioning authorities about the volatile nature of the family involved. Surprising details from her statements also emerged. She reportedly mentioned instances of unusual behavior by certain family members prior to the murders, moments of anger, secrecy, and inexplicable actions that, in retrospect, seemed to foreshadow the tragedy. Each anecdote she shared painted a picture of a household under strain, where wealth, control, and secrecy intersected in dangerous ways. Investigators had to consider every minor detail, knowing that even seemingly trivial actions could hold the key to understanding the sequence of events. Romy's testimony also provided context for the alleged $50 million pact between Tracy and Nick. While she did not fully disclose the details of the financial arrangement, she acknowledged that there were tensions related to money, inheritance, and family obligations. These insights offered investigators and the public a glimpse into the environment that may have contributed to the tragic outcomes. Money, secrecy, and power were not abstract concepts. They were tangible pressures shaping decisions, behavior, and ultimately, the events of that fatal Sunday. The role of trust and betrayal became apparent through Romy's account. Families rely on trust as a foundational element, but when secrets, manipulations, or coercive arrangements exist, trust can erode rapidly. Romy's warnings about a dangerous family member underscored this dynamic, highlighting the difficulty of navigating loyalty in a household where financial incentives and hidden motives influence behavior. Media coverage of Romy's testimony amplified its impact. Headlines emphasized her courage, her emotional insight, and the warnings she provided to authorities. Public fascination surged as audiences sought to understand not just the events themselves, but the complex human emotions behind them. Grief, fear, loyalty, resentment, and love, all tangled in a web of wealth and secrecy. Romy's words resonated because they humanized a tragedy that could otherwise be reduced to statistics or sensationalist speculation. Her testimony also prompted deeper questions about the psychological state of Nick Reiner. Could he have been acting under duress or influence from his mother's pact? Was he positioned to absorb consequences for actions he may not have intended? Romy's observations did not answer these questions directly, but they illuminated the tensions, pressures, and moral ambiguities that defined the family's interactions. In essence, Romy became the lens through which investigators and the public could glimpse the inner workings of a family on the edge. Her courage in speaking out, her attention to detail, and her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths made her testimony invaluable. Yet it also placed her in an emotionally precarious position, grappling with the loss of her parents, the potential guilt of family members, and the moral complexity of revealing secrets that had long been buried. And while Romy's revelations provided clarity in some areas, they also deepened the mystery in others. Her warnings about a dangerous family member, coupled with insights into the alleged financial arrangements, raised new questions. How far did the pact influence behavior? Was the confrontation between Rob and Tracy a trigger or merely a symptom of deeper issues? And what role did fear, loyalty, and greed play in the moments leading to the tragedy? The human element of her testimony cannot be overstated. It highlights the conflict between love and accountability, loyalty and truth, secrecy and transparency. In a family where money and power intersected with personal relationships, these tensions created conditions in which tragedy became almost inevitable. Romy's account forces us to confront uncomfortable realities, that wealth cannot protect from human error, and that secrets, even those kept with the best intentions, can have catastrophic consequences. As investigators continue to piece together the evidence, Romy's testimony serves as both a guide and a warning. It illuminates the psychological, financial, and emotional factors at play, while also highlighting the precarious nature of family dynamics under extreme pressure. Her words suggest that understanding this tragedy requires more than a timeline or a list of suspects. It requires an appreciation for the complex interplay of relationships, secrets, and choices that define the Reiner family. But the most shocking aspect of Romy's testimony is yet to be revealed. According to Jake Reiner, her account hinted at secrets and pressures that even she may not have fully understood at the time. Hidden motives, undisclosed arrangements, and the looming shadow of the $50 million pact all point to a story far more intricate and far more chilling than anyone had imagined. What came next would force investigators and the public to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the Reiners. Romy's courage in speaking out had opened a door, but behind that door lay truths that were as shocking as they were dangerous, setting the stage for revelations that could redefine the entire narrative. How do you trace $50 million? And what secrets can a paper trail reveal when money, family, and betrayal collide? In the Reiner case, investigators discovered that the alleged transfer from Tracy to Nick was far more than a simple financial transaction. It was a roadmap to motives, pressures, and possibly premeditated manipulation that had deadly consequences. Bank records show that the $50 million transfer was executed in multiple stages, carefully structured to avoid raising immediate red flags. Each wire carried its own set of coded references, legal disclaimers, and conditional clauses that, at first glance, might appear routine to outsiders. But to those who knew the family and the internal conflicts, each transaction was loaded with meaning, a signal of intent, control, and secrecy. The timing of the transfers is particularly significant. Reports suggest they occurred shortly after Rob Reiner confronted Tracy about alleged lies regarding inheritance distributions. The immediacy implies a reactionary measure. Tracy may have felt the confrontation threatened not only her authority, but also her personal security and financial standing. By transferring such a vast sum, she could buy compliance, silence, and, theoretically, protection against exposure. But what she may not have fully anticipated was the moral and psychological pressure this placed on Nick. Investigators delved deep into the details, examining every account, wire, and communication. They looked for patterns, inconsistencies, and anomalies. Was the transfer designed as a bribe, a reward, or a protective measure? Was it enforceable legally, or was it purely psychological, designed to influence behavior under the threat of wealth and loss? Each answer raised new questions, complicating the narrative and deepening the intrigue. Jake Reiner's insider account adds chilling context. According to him, the pact was more than money. It was a contract of moral coercion. Nick, already struggling with conflicting loyalties to his parents, now faced a financial incentive that could dictate his actions. The conditional nature of the transfer, requiring him to absorb the fallout if something went wrong, effectively positioned him as a shield, a fall guy ready to take the blame for circumstances he may not have orchestrated. Romy's observations tie into this as well. She reportedly noticed unusual behavior from Nick in the weeks leading up to the murders. Sudden withdrawals, secretive phone calls, and changes in routine. While no one could definitively link these actions to the $50 million transfer, they suggest a psychological burden that money alone cannot explain. Could the pressure of the pact